Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Actual Tech Media Expert Series. Today's topic in our ongoing security series is fine-tuning operations to keep the enterprise secure. My name is Keith Ward. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I am thrilled to be your moderator for what promises to be a spectacular event today. But before I deep dive with our expert, I need to cover some housekeeping items. First off, we want your questions. Just put them in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Now, that Q&A panel is also the place just to say hello, which a lot of you have been doing already. We love to know where you are logging in from. And that Q&A box is also the place to let us know if we can help in the unlikely, hopefully, event that you have any technical issues. First thing you want to do is a browser refresh. If something goes sideways, you can't hear something or see something. If that doesn't work, well, try another refresh. Sometimes it takes a couple of refreshes. Then let us know in the Q&A, and we will provide further technical assistance to help you out. And remember to check out the handouts section, which has links to great free resources from both of our sponsors today. The handouts section also has a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. Check those out after today's event and sign up for any that strike your fancy. And the last bit of housekeeping today is that we are awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant at the end of today's expert series. And yes, that could be you. Now, you do have to be in attendance during the entire live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of this prize drawing can be found also in that handout section. Scroll to the bottom and you'll find all the extremely boring, monotonous prize terms and conditions link there. Now, these expert series events are special product neutral looks at pressing technology problems presented by an expert in the field, but the support of our sponsors does make it possible for us to bring you this content. So we want to give a special shout out to our sponsors today. First up, we are supported by Cisco Duo. You know that name, one of the most famous in the business. And Duo's data security features meet users where they are for simple yet powerful and secure access. Fewer roadblocks means users are more likely to adopt best cybersecurity practices and create a safer world for data for us all. And that's something I think we can all agree that we would like, you know? Okay, today's event is also sponsored by our good friends at Rubrik. By 2025, the cybercrime business will be worth $10 trillion. That's with a T. That makes it the third largest economy in the world. How scary is that statistic? Now, to fight back, you need a way to secure your data, monitor for data risks, and quickly recover your data no matter where it lives. That, my friends, is Rubrik. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Trevor Pott. Trevor is a solutions architect, security expert, and writer. More than that, he's been a good friend of mine for more than a decade now, and his knowledge of security is, quite frankly, legendary. I can't wait to join Trevor for an in-depth discussion about fine-tuning operations to keep the enterprise secure. Trevor is here now, so I am going to hop over there and get this conversation going. Great to have you here, Trevor. So let's just get to the first question today, since time is a-wasting. Can you give us a brief history of the evolution of SOCs, i.e. Security Operations Centers?
Yes, absolutely. So I think one of the best histories on the evolution of this is produced by a professional association, goes by ISACA. It used to be known as Information Systems Audit and Control Association, and just now goes by the letters. What they have put together is this sort of history that spans from pre-1995 to today. And it starts with, before 1995, you had network operation centers where what they would do is they would basically focus on device management and maybe do some malicious code analysis. And that was, like the earliest version of what eventually became a SOC. Between 95 and 2000, 96 and 2000, we saw, intrusion detection come out, antiviruses. So, we started incorporating those into our network operations centers, and they became the security operations centers. Sort of after the turn of the millennium, compliance got rolled into this, incident response, and then just around the cloud era, 2007-ish, we started seeing a lot of managed security providers. And right around that time, the regulatory environment started becoming a thing. So we started integrating regulatory analysis and log monitoring, and some of the bigger ones were actually doing analysis, like, in-house analysis on malware. And this eventually led to the hybrid security operations centers, where you would have your own on-premises stuff that was largely a network operations center with some level of managing your in-house security applications and whatnot, but then also a managed security center that you worked with. And this is where we started to see more incorporation of reverse engineering, AI, ML, threat intelligence. And this was more about 10 years ago, 2013, 2015-ish. And since then, we have been really evolving towards the network detection and response model, which incorporates threat hunting, automation, orchestration, analytics, external risk scoring, and even more. And I think that the history of the SOC is in part that there was this very on-premises managed device management sort of setup where it was all about essentially systems administration. We got to a point right around the cloud era where that was becoming, all of the new technologies were becoming more than the average SOC could handle. So we moved out towards managed services. And that sort of never went away. As we've had to add more and more and more technologies, and things have become more complex, we have started incorporating more and more providers into our SOCs. And so constantly combining what we're doing internally with what other vendors are doing, and eventually even supply chain providers.
Right. And so basically, that was a comprehensive overview. So what does this say about how or what does this indicate, I guess, about how the overall approach to information security has changed over this time?
To a large extent, it is that it has become more complex. But there are a couple of really noticeable examples of this. So very specifically, if you look at what we had for firewalls, sort of pre-1995, everything was just layer 3. It was, packet filters, right? And today, we are, not just doing layer 7 analysis, but we're doing layer 7 analysis at the individual endpoints. So on your phone, on your laptop, on your server as well. There's layer 7 analysis happening at all sides of the connection. The other big example of this is that we've moved from signature-based security largely to behavioral security. And in one sense, I think it's what we were always telling everybody that you needed to do. You needed to establish baselines. You needed to compare what's going on to a baseline. But it's only recently that the tools for actually doing this, especially at scale, have started to become really available. So that's, in the past 10 years or so, have we really started to see the behavioral side of security pick up in more than just pockets, but as an overall approach to security.
So can you give me, Trevor, a quick example of how you would maybe define and distinguish signal-based from behavioral-based?
Okay, so signature-based is like your traditional antivirus, where you get a signature. It says this virus looks like this. If you get a file that has a hash of this, that's a virus, right? Behavioral is looking for deviations from the norm, where how you define the norm can be a little bit squishy and fuzzy depending on your organization, even the groups within your organization. So it could be something like the computer would think it was perfectly normal for me to log in from my home, or it would think that it was normal for me to log in from the big city because I semi-regularly go to the big city. But if I tried to log in from Vancouver, which is 13 hours away, it wouldn't allow it. It would freak out and say, that's abnormal. And in that case, we're doing behavioral analysis on authentication, but I mean, it applies to everything. You can do this looking for applications trying to connect to a server, trying to connect, they typically connect in one way consistently all the time. And then all of a sudden there's maybe some extra connections, some extra ports, different strings. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, trying to explain like all of what is behavioral wouldn't even be possible because we're getting into now we're doing so much of it, I can't follow it all.
Right. But the important thing is the kind of evolution to that, kind of security model. So I want to move on into a topic that is relatively little discussed, but I think is pretty important. And this is jargon in the security industry. So there's a lot of it, right? Can you talk about the evolution of terminology within the information security space? But let's go deeper than that and talk about how that actually affects, security pros in the business.
Well, I think that the problem that we face in IT in general, but very specifically in security, is our jargon is almost instantly co-opted by vendors, by marketing, by even journalists, anybody who wants to get in on the latest buzzword, right? So the jargon becomes a buzzword. The buzzword becomes an attempt to sell you a product. And one of the big problems that we have is that the jargon term that gets defined by an analyst somewhere will be co-opted by a vendor in order to describe something that they already have on the truck, right? Because they want to be able to say, our product does X, even when it does no such thing, right? So they subtly alter the definition of the term and push it out there and market it. And then some other vendor does this, and then some other vendor does this. And because the jargon term, the buzzword, has become this must-have thing in security, it becomes part of tick box management. And in order to tick off that box, the managers just go and buy the usually cheapest product that claims it can do the thing. And by that point, the buzzword has just lost all meaning. You're not necessarily actually getting a product that does what that buzzword says it's going to do. And the downstream consequences of that are that the actual security practitioners end up losing a lot of faith in whatever that buzzword or bit of jargon is going to be. So you might find that certain people who implemented on a regular basis or who were part of the original teams that first developed the technologies that eventually became this buzzword have a decent belief in it and say, hey, yeah, it can do all these great things. But you're average security practitioner going on to social media or whatever is just going to see all of the other security practitioners saying mean things about it, in large part not because they're saying mean things about the actual hypothetical concept, but about the fact that the vendors have come along and co-opted it and in order to claim that whatever they already sell does the new thing. And that is damaging because it can then dramatically slow adoption.
Interesting. And buzzword itself is kind of a buzzword, isn't it? So I guess the takeaway there is do your homework, find out for yourself. Don't just accept what other people are saying, about a product. Marketing has a very specific purpose, and you need to understand what that purpose is. And that purpose typically is not just to tell you exactly how a product works, but rather to get you to buy that product.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's move on. I want to you spent a lot of time in the security space. So I'd love to pick your brain and have you give me some practical knowledge that you have seen, that you have used over there on optimizing the security operations centers. What are some of your top tips and tricks, if you will, to use a buzzword, right?
Well, the top tips and tricks that I have for optimizing your security operations center in whatever form that happens to take or buzzword it currently uses, really boil down to a lot of focusing on the fundamentals. So in terms of perhaps one of the more modern views on this, one of the most important things is to embrace dynamicity. There will be daily changes in your environment, especially if you are operating at a large scale. So you need to be able to have your existing processes and procedures and your behavioral analytics designed to deal with a certain amount of dynamicity in your environment. And how you fine tune that really is going to determine how much work you have to do as an information security professional. I guess the number 2 item that I would say is do the boring work. The mundane configuration issues that you have that are everywhere are way bigger of a threat than any 0-day. My canonical example of this is actually Microsoft, who sells some of the best security software and services out there. They have absolutely great technology. And they have recently had a couple of embarrassing incidents, at least one of which boiled down to there was some mundane stuff that wasn't taken care of. It can happen to everyone, and it does. And so do the boring work first. Focus on that because that's going to save you a lot of trouble. My third piece of advice is just log absolutely everything. Without logs, you can't do any analysis. And more importantly, convincing vendors of anything becomes impossible. If you've genuinely found a problem and you don't have extensive logs to prove this, the vendors aren't going to want to do anything about it. You're going to need logs to convince anybody of anything.
Yeah, and in this regulatory environment, those are more important than ever, too. You've got to have records. You've got to have written logs just to protect yourself.
Yes, and so
you ever have. Yeah.
I would continue on with that by saying invest in software. And by this, I mean, there is SOC optimization software out there. Again, Microsoft is an example of a vendor that sells good stuff. But you're also going to need to invest in software to parse those logs, to process it, to do your behavioral analysis, right? I mean, it's cool and everything if you know how to script everything in the world and you could single-handedly He-Man your way towards victory with your cool coder skills, but then you're going to get a new job and everybody else who works with you is going to have a lot of trouble dealing with all your homebrew stuff. Following on from that, keep constantly refining everything. This goes back to that whole embrace dynamicity to a certain extent, but also doing the boring work, right? Identifying and reducing false positives is the single biggest challenge that a SOC can face, that really any security team can face. And that leaves me with, I guess, my final bit of advice for optimizing your SOC, which is what gets measured gets done. Measure your mean time to detection and measure your mean time to response. Constantly measure them, because by focusing on those, you are actually going to focus on the outcomes of your efforts.
Process is important. Absolutely. So does this mean then that you're kind of against cutting edge security tech? Do you think people need the cutting edge, always the latest and the greatest? If, and if not, what should practitioners be keeping an eye on? So sort of the opposite end of that lens you were just discussing.
Well, I'm not against cutting edge tech, although I have something of a reputation for being a pretty big skeptic of it. Technology itself isn't the problem. I think the biggest problem is there are a lot of technology implementations where the attitude of the vendor is you must change how your organization works in order to suit the technology. And that generally doesn't go over well. It causes a lot of problems. Those kind of changes can take months, can take years. You don't even know if that product is going to be around from that vendor by the time that you're done. Focus on finding technologies that work the way your organization works. Make the fewest changes possible in your organization in order to accommodate the software. Go out and find the software or the hardware that meets your needs. And that, brings me to sort of part two of this, which is profile ops viability. You need to understand the implementation details of any technologies that you're proposing to introduce, and whether or not that's going to be viable in your environment. And by viable in your environment, I don't just mean, oh, you have a server in it and it will meet the minimum specifications, but how are you going to manage and administer this technology over time? And who's going to do that? And how does that fit into your existing processes and procedures? The flip side of that is that there is a big difference between understanding the implementation of a technology and understanding how a technology works. So if you're planning on introducing any new technology, whether it's leading edge or not, you need to focus on the fundamentals and understand how it works, not necessarily all the details of the implementation. They are two different things, right? Somebody on that team needs to understand the details of how the software itself actually works, how it does what it does, and why it was designed to do it that way. And when you do all of these things, you can see beyond the hype that's out there. And hopefully we'll bear in mind that technologies and protocols, especially that you find out on the market, especially early in a hype cycle, are developed to meet a vendor's goals, not yours. So you have to pay special attention to making sure that whatever the leading edge technology is, that it's actually going to do what you need it to do and slot into your organization and be viable. But don't be introducing technologies that are ultimately going to cause more problems if you can't get a handle on that, and just because they happen to be the latest, greatest stuff.
Which, of course, goes back to what we were discussing a few minutes ago about buzzwords and the hype and all of that. Also, a reminder from someone like me who likes analogies and metaphors. Cutting edges can also cut stuff open and break things. So you need to be aware of something that is cutting edge. I mean, that can slice open and cause a disruption that you just really are not prepared for.
Don't cut
100%.
yourself on the bleeding edge of the hype cycle.
Exactly, because you could bleed all over your data center, and it could stop working. 100%. Okay, so let me set this next thing up a little bit. I just earlier today I was trying to do a little bit of online banking using a new system from a new bank, and everything was a struggle for me. And I know technology pretty well. Couldn't get anything done, having to pick my oldest niece's first name, and all of these different things at every turn, at every step. It was harder and harder. Eventually, after 2 attempts, because the instructions were not clear, I got locked out of the system. I still can't get back into the system. So this is this so keep that in mind when I ask this question. As a security team, how do you balance having security solid versus business needs, i.e., getting things done?
Well, my number one piece of advice is one that unfortunately is controversial in the information security space, but I feel really shouldn't be. And that is ease of use is incredibly important. Whatever solutions you deploy must work for everyone. They can't just be for the fittest, most able members of your workforce. They can't just be for the most technologically savvy. They need to work for everyone. Security that is too hard to use will not be used. And that is a perpetual oversight in our industry, unfortunately. But I think another really critical piece of advice in terms of making security meet the needs of the business is invest in automation. Automation, 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 best practices, and yet more automation. One of the reasons that I say this is that when you're automating something, to a certain extent, you are making some self-documenting infrastructure, right? You are encoding not just what your infrastructure is in your automation, but you're encoding your intent. You want this thing to do this or to do this other thing under these circumstances. And the more that you automate, the more that you're taking your runbooks and your playbooks and you are putting them into code, the more that you are going through your infrastructure and saying, hey, this is a possible error condition. Here's how we're going to handle it. And this goes back to that bit that I was discussing earlier about, focus on the boring stuff, focus on your fundamentals, right? It's not as sexy as worrying about 0 days all of the time, but it's what saves you when the world is on fire. Because by going through and having done all your automation and taking care of all of this, when you are flooded with adrenaline and there's alarms going off everywhere and you just have to solve the problem, having all of that automation in place is going to save you. And my last bit of advice is something that I think most security professionals would agree with, but outside of security, there's a great deal of disagreement on this, and that is data is toxic. You must treat data like toxic waste, only keep around as much as you absolutely must, and destroy everything else. You cannot lose data that you've already deleted yourself, assuming you've deleted it everywhere.
Yeah. I will say this, Trevor, you never are afraid of disagreeing with the consensus, with going against the grain, but never for the purpose of just doing it. I mean, I would call you a skeptic and not a cynic. I will also say this to wrap up that discussion about that balance. I already told my wife that once we get the money transferred that we need to, we are closing that account and we are never using that bank again, because if it's going to be this much hassle for me to do anything in there, it's simply not worth it. I will go where it's easier and I can still get my work done.
Competition is good.
Competition is good, is good. Okay. And so I finally today, let me ask you this. Where can practitioners go to get actionable insights and best practices for their organization? So some practical advice here.
I think it's really important that practitioners go to multiple places. So there are some international organizations which are useful. ISACA, which is an international professional association. They do certs, they do education. They're focused on InfoSec best practices. Cloud Security Alliance, very similar, but with a more narrow focus on the cloud. International Association of Privacy Professionals does what it says on the tin. You're going to learn a lot from those three organizations. ISC2, which is more focused on training and certs than perhaps establishing best practices, is still a place that you are going to find a lot of security professionals. You're going to find a lot of advice. You're going to learn a lot of things. The SANS Institute in the US is for-profit and focused on training and certs, but again, does have a lot of events and resources available. And your national security organizations will have information that is beneficial to you. CISA in the US, CCCS in Canada, NCSC in the UK. These are the kind of organizations that try to define the best practices, first of all, for their nation, but then take that information, make it easily consumable, and put it out there so that companies of all sizes can actually implement this stuff.
Did you was that your main list? Because I did have a quick follow-up question now that you've listed some of these organizations.
Sure.
Okay. So first of all, I wanted to say that, in other words, there is help out there. You are not alone in this. There are plenty of organizations willing to help. So related to that, now this will be the final question, I think. What's your general opinion, without naming any names, of bringing on a security partner, a security vendor, just to help or to offload your security ops to a third party? Do you have any kind of general advice or opinions about going that direction?
Well, I have two largish thoughts on that. The first is that probably the biggest risk that anybody in information security takes is thinking that they know something. Just in preparing for having this conversation with you, I had to, go and do a little bit of research and catch myself up on what was the latest and greatest in a bunch of stuff, and, fell down the rabbit hole for a few hours. And I walked away just completely astonished by how much I had missed in the past 2 months while I had been focusing on forest fires locally. It is an industry that moves fast. You don't know everything. And if you think you do, you're the problem. Outside help is always useful, even if it's just doing peer review with other information security members. You got to start somewhere. And the follow-on to that is, the bigger the organization is that you work for, the more absolutely critical third-party providers become, not just in providing software and services, but managed services, advice, audits. You need people with expertise that you don't have and who can come in with an unbiased eye and periodically, take a look around, see what's going on. So Well, I generally do not like being reliant on anyone else or any vendors, especially. I don't see how we get away from it in security.
Yeah.
To secure tech, you have to secure absolutely everything. And we are well past the point that how all of this stuff works can fit in a single human brain, or even the brain of everybody in a moderate sized department. You're going to need help. And that's just the reality of it. We are in this together.
And we are well beyond the period of the walled garden, which was still a thing when I was a young IT lad way back when. And it's just moving too fast, too many holes out there, too much attack surface, which basically the whole internet now. So, Trevor, this has been so much fun to have you on today to discuss ways to fine tune your operations to keep your enterprise secure. Thank you so much for dropping all this knowledge on us. It has been a true delight for me.
Wonderful to talk to you again.
Okay, now that was such a blast. Thank you, Trevor, so much for being on with me. I always enjoy talking with you, and this was especially educational and eye-opening for me. I hope it was for all of you attendees too. I learned just so much that that I can't even remember it all at this point, but I was sure glad I was here today for that. And now, folks, it is time to give away our $250 Amazon card. As I said up top, you do have to be present for the entire event to be eligible to win that Amazon gift card. And we do have a winner for today's event, and that winner is Mike Hochstein from Pennsylvania. Congratulations to you, Mike. We're going to be in touch ASAP to get you your card, so sit tight. And with that, folks, we are wrapped for this event. On behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank our sponsors for making this wonderful event possible, Cisco, Duo, and Rubrik. I want to thank you attendees for being here, for your great questions, for your interest in this topic, and for spending part of your day with us. You are the reason we do this, and I always love spending the time with you. I can't wait to see you in the next event. So that wraps it for today, folks. Have a great rest of your day.